Well, so let's talk about having fun. We like to have fun by having these sci-fi dialogues, but other
Yeah.
people like to have fun in different ways. And one of the things we had talked about heading into this, because we had a brief chat the other day, as we like to do, and talk about what we want to talk about,
Hmm.
um, is different parts of life that it's important to have some focus on and maybe have some success in, right? So having fun could be one, recreation. Uh,
Right.
you can't just work all the time. So you need to do things that you find pleasurable and enjoyable, and those are different things for different people, different hobbies, and so on. Um, you want to have your sort of your finances in place so that you're not
Yeah.
living under a bridge somewhere, and these sorts of things. Uh, so what sort of there's different ways to chunk this out, right? So I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious how you think about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do have a list that I use
You like
for.
lists, don't you?
I like lists. Yeah. For a while, it was a list of seven, and then I added an eighth. But it's body, love or family, work, play, friendship, mind, and spirit, and then I added economics, which
Ah,
I feel is its own kind of domain. But that's my nice little list of
okay.
eight areas.
Well, let's see. I have a
You
fixation on
have
the number six. I have to
you
say, I
you
have a fixation on the
yes.
number six. So everything is
Yeah.
like six for me because I was born on the sixth. I have two. My dad was born on the sixth. One of my sisters was born on the sixth. All my other people in my family are some multiple of six. We
Yeah.
had six people in the family because I have my parents and three sisters. But I don't know. I've always had this fascination with the number six for some reason. And don't I don't. There's no necessarily numerological significance to it, but there you go. So my six, because we can't go to seven or eight, you see, but my six. I have this analogy that I was drawing between um, different parts of life to invest in. Okay,
Yeah.
uh, and I follow this investment strategy called the permanent portfolio. Although there's kind of different variations on it, and I'd use one of the variations called the golden butterfly. So it's you invest in four different assets under the permanent portfolio. So you invest in stocks, you invest in bonds, you invest in cash, or you have some money in cash, and then you invest in gold. And as things change, you rebalance and you go back to 25% on each of those. I actually follow this golden butterfly, which has a higher percentage of stocks. But then, of course, I had to find the other two, right? You can't stop at four. So I was reading about at some point because I have a vague interest in the economic side, right, and finances and investing and stuff like that. I don't spend a lot of time on it, which is one of the reasons I like finding the permanent portfolio because I don't have to look at dividend stocks and figure out what to invest in and all that kind of stuff. But the super rich, apparently, and this goes back quite a ways, back to the 1600s and so on. So the super rich who are looking to create intergenerational wealth. So let's say you're the Carnegies or the Rockefellers or something like
Yeah.
that. Right? They don't just put their money in stocks and bonds. They buy land. So they have like islands that they own and stuff like this. And they also buy art. So they will invest in, paintings and sculpture and stuff like that because this is a form of intergenerational wealth. No one's ever going to look down on Michelangelo or Titian
Yeah.
or Raphael or whoever. So they buy art and they kind of pass this on to their kids. So there gives you my six, right? So I've got stocks, bonds, cash, gold, art, and real estate.
Oh,
So then I was looking for analogies because I like analogies between each of these things and different domains of life. And I was thinking
yeah.
about this some years ago. So cash is like health, right? If you run out of cash, if you run out of health, that's it. You're dead,
Yeah.
right? So you always have to have this sort of cash reserve or health reserve, health and fitness, that you take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Um, so that was the cash component. And
Yeah.
then the stocks component was like your work, your
Sure.
finances, things like that. I sort of lump those together. But they could be seen as separate. And if this is all of these divisions are kind of arbitrary in a way, right? So bear with me. Bonds was relationships, right? You have a
Uh-huh.
bond with people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, and so that's family, friendship, all those things, what the Greeks would have called philia, different relationships that you have. So then that got me to gold, which I saw as wisdom. So
uh-huh.
gold is something that doesn't tarnish, that is kind of evergreen, ever present. So that was kind of the wisdom component from trying to understand life and things like that.
Yeah,
Um, Real estate was your character, developing your character, because there's a line in Thoreau's Walden, I think it is, where he talks about your true real estate. Your true real estate is your character.
yeah.
So I always like that from Thoreau. Actually, his name is Thoreau, like the god Thor. Um,
Thorough.
Thoreau, yes, and Henry David Thoreau. And the art component was beauty. So
Yeah, yeah,
nature, art, uh, you know, different things that are cause you enjoyment, intellectual music, all those kinds of things. Was those
yeah.
those were my six. Um, so,
Okay, okay.
but
That's
in any
yeah,
case, I do think it's important, kind of like the Greeks always talked about a sound mind and a sound body, things like that.
yeah.
Have some balance between these, right? So you'll see people who all they do is work out at the gym and they're super fit, right?
Right,
But maybe their finances are a mess or something like
right.
that. People who work all the time and they ignore their family. So I do think it's important to have balance among all of those to live well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so what do you make of the distinction between the mind and the spirit? In other words, do you see a zone that's spiritual as differentiated from a zone that is mental?
I don't like all those kinds of things, mind, body, soul. Those I find them
Uh,
artificial, right? Because I think of someone as a person. And I noticed we've got my friend Kurt is in the chat here, and he talks about personhood as well and wholeness. And I agree with Kurt on that because I do think that you are a person, and there's different aspects or different activities that you engage in. But I don't like to think in terms of, well, this little compartment over here is the mind, and that little compartment over there is the spirit, and this one's the
uh,
soul, and then you get the body. I think it's artificial. So I don't like to really think that way.
yeah.
Um, it doesn't come naturally to me.
In that case, what about, well, I suppose religion and philosophy?
Well, we talked about this several times, haven't we?
I suppose so, yes.
Um, well, those are big topics. And so I've been reading a lot about ancient Greek religion recently because I'm writing this book on Aristotle. And so I want to understand. I've been reading some more books on ancient Greek history and ancient Greek religion. Um, the Homeric Gods was a great book by a guy named Walter Otto that was published in English in 1954. That is an amazing book that I just finished reading a few weeks ago. And so, that as we talked about, I think it was last time, Adrian, that there's religion can mean different things too. So for some people, it's kind of a belief system.
Yeah.
In fact, I was just reading a very interesting book about Spinoza's religion. Spinoza, the philosopher, Jewish Dutch philosopher, from the 1600s, and at that time or around that time, because of the religious wars in Europe that were over doctrinal points of doctrine, right? So religion kind of was morphing around that time and a little before into a view of a creed, right? That you had to agree with these certain points of doctrine, and that was your religion. And
Yeah, yeah.
whereas before that, the author of this book, Claire Carlisle, she cites someone whose name I don't remember, um, who had a series of lectures then published as a book, famous series of lectures, the Gifford Lectures, on religion. And what was interesting was before around that time, people would talk about Christian religion. And Christian religion meant acting as a certain way. And then around this time, it turned into the Christian religion. And they would say the Christian, then they've contrasted that with the Jewish religion and this religion. So before that, it was really religion was more about how you acted, and you were charitable toward people, right? And you loved your neighbor and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't about doctrine. Okay.
Right.
So that kind of aligns with my sort of view of practical philosophy, which is that, as I put it in one of my posts last year, the unit of greatness in philosophy is a life. So it's not a book, right? It's not a theory. It's not a
Mhm.
system. It's how you live. And so in that sense, I think in that older sense of religion, I think there's a lot of commonality between philosophy and religion because it's about how you live. It's your character and how you try to learn in life and what insights you try to find in life. So
Mhm.
in that sense, they're kind of similar, but that's sort of an old-fashioned view of what religion is all about.
Mm. Yeah. Well, um, so we're talking about fulfillment, and I've been wanting to ask you about the concept of happiness from a kind of
Yeah.
philosophical perspective for a long time. Is fulfillment and happiness the same concept in philosophy? What, how do you see happiness? I feel like it's a little bit of
That's a big
I don't know,
topic.
obsession of modern Western culture. I don't know if that's just my subculture that I'm in or what have you, but yeah, what's
No. Well, we've got it enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, right? The pursuit of happiness.
yeah, yeah.
So, my understanding, I'm not going to speak for all philosophers. A lot of philosophers don't even care about these topics, right?
Mm,
Because they're talking about philosophy of mind or, political philosophy or something like that. They're not necessarily very focused on these topics. But um, in ancient Greek, there was a word eudaimonia, and that really meant something like being well starred, right? To have sort of a good fairy godmother, if you will, looking over you and kind of looking over your life, and things go well for you, right? So your life goes well.
oh,
Um, and there's a famous line from a Greek thinker named Solon, who was one of the seven sages of ancient Greece. And he said, count no one happy until they've died. Now, so he really meant don't consider that someone's life has gone well until they're no longer with us. Because there are famous stories from ancient Greece, for instance, Priam, who was the king of Troy, who had everything. He had everything, right? He ruled the city of Troy and so on. And then the Greeks showed up with Achilles and Agamemnon and all those guys. And it all came crashing down, right? And so all of his sons got killed in the war and so on and so forth. So
mm,
that was a famous story. There was another one of Cyrus, who was the king of Persia, of Lydia, which was basically modern day Turkey. And kind of the same thing happened to him, and it all went haywire at the end. And you couldn't really say that Priam or Cyrus um, lived well, because in the end, it all came crashing down.
well,
So
ma-
the view that happiness is how you're feeling today. Oh, I'm feeling happy today. The ancient Greeks thought of it more in terms of how your life goes, and have you lived well? Have things gone well for you?
okay, so now this is interesting. Then that makes intuitive sense to me, but I think many modern Westerners would say this doesn't make any sense. If the person was happy for 60 years and then the last year of their life was awful, then that's 90 95% happiness or whatever, whatever.
Right.
So, so is there a difference in kind of ontological perspective or seeing life more from a place of eternity as opposed to seeing life as occurring on this timeline that's just a series of moments?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, so our word happiness
Yeah.
comes from happen. It comes from the same root as hap. So hap, to have good hap in in Anglo-Saxon and Old English meant to have good fortune. Things have gone well for you. Um,
Oh,
and over time, and so I think that's the sense probably that Thomas Jefferson had in mind, although things were kind of changing a little bit around that time as well. But the pursuit of happiness meant to the pursuit of having your life go well, basically. So that notion was sort of still around, but it's morphed quite a bit into our how we think of happiness, right? Oh, this plant is very happy on the now that I put it near the window.
right. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's such a happy, my dog is very happy to be tossing the ball with me and all this kind of stuff. So we have this kind of momentary feeling of pleasure, and that's happiness. And
yeah.
it's also what the psychologists, if you look at some of the research psychologists, they talk about subjective well-being and oh yeah, I'm feeling good.
Yeah.
And so that is sort of our sense of happiness. And then you could get what you're saying. Oh well, all these little slices of time throughout my whole life, things were kind of up, and yeah, I had some bad moments, but then it all came crashing down like it did for Priam in the Iliad, right?
Yeah.
And but for the ancient Greeks, they'd say, well, that person's life didn't actually it was good up to a point, but then it went horribly wrong. And so you can't really say that that person's whole life, the life was the measure as opposed to these moment by moment feelings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm drawn toward this idea of well starred because that to me, that suggests um, uh, a relationship with something beyond the material self.
Well, not
It's
necessarily. I mean, that's kind of a metaphorical phrase that I was using. So let's talk about Shakespeare for a minute. So Othello, is to me is the hardest Shakespeare play to read. It's just so sad, right? And Othello gets turned by Iago against his sweetheart Desdemona, and doesn't trust what she is saying, right? And Iago is whispering things into Othello's ear, and he eventually kills her. So it's a very sad story. And Desdemona, the name Desdemona is the opposite of eudaimonia. It's dysdaimonia is basically her name, right? So she was ill-starred. Um, Things did not go well for her. She was happy up to a point, right? But then the gods were not smiling on her, if you will, and her life didn't turn out well and ended early, and she was murdered by her husband. So it can't get too much worse than that, right? Um, but yeah, Heraclitus, an ancient Greek philosopher who preceded Plato and Socrates and all those guys, um, said your daimon is your character. So yes, there was this idea that your daimon was kind of like a fairy godmother, or the gods were watching over you. And not to get into details of ancient Greek religion, that there was this sort of guiding star that you had, if you will. But it wasn't. They didn't really have a concept of fate like we do in the modern times, because all they knew that everyone was immortal, and we were all fated to die, and we weren't going to live like the gods did, who were immortal, right?
Mhm.
So, um, so yeah, I mean, what is this daimon of the eudaimonia? It's according to Heraclitus and Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and those people, would be your character. What have you developed that enables you to deal with bad misfortunes in life, that enables you to deal with good fortune, so that it doesn't all go to your head and you have some perspective, that enables you to deal with abuse from people, like people who don't respect you. What are you going to do? Well, if you have a strong character, you can deal with adversity. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare quotes actually Boethius and calls philosophy the sweet milk of adversity. It'll get you through, right? Because you've developed this character, you've developed wisdom, and now life is throwing you all these curveballs, and yet you've got this strength of character, and you've got this sense of wisdom that enables you to get through all of that. And so, according to the philosophical school of the ancient Greeks, even including the Stoics and so on, if you have a good character, you can deal with the hard things in life. You can still live well, even though you're not, quote unquote, happy in our sense all the time, because you know how to get through life and how to live well. But that's not our modern notion. I want to be happy, happy, happy all the time, right? Give me some happiness hacks so that I can feel even better all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's counterproductive. I have a book on the shelf back here somewhere called The Pursuit of Unhappiness. And by a philosopher, I think at Washington University in St. Louis. And he talks about how this constant pursuit of feeling good is actually counterproductive, because you're sort of, your measure is wrong. You're measuring the wrong thing, right? So you're trying to have this measure of good feelings at all times. And life is not like that, right? You might get fired from your job. There's a lot of injustice in the world, and people die who are close to you, and all this kind of stuff, right? So to have this sort of idea that, oh, well, my wife died in February, right? And it's not the kind of thing that, oh, well, why am I not feeling happy? I should feel happy, happy, happy all the time. No, you should open yourself up to the sadnesses in life and the tragedies of life. And to have this idea that, oh no, I have to be happy at every moment is a falsity. It's a falsification of what life is all about.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. It's a common theme, I would say, in therapy. There's a certain amount of unhappiness caused by the effort to always be happy, and to avoid or try to suppress or get rid of painful feelings.
Yeah.
So sometimes that's part of the therapeutic process, is this helping a person accept the painful feelings so they can digest them and integrate whatever information may be in those feelings, etc.
Yeah. You have much more experience than I do in this domain. My experience is my personal experience, right? But you work with people all the time to kind of, talk through these issues and gain a better understanding. But I could see that one could almost have a sense of guilt. Why am I not feeling happy? It must be something wrong with me, right? Or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that happens a lot.
So I think we have a false set of expectations about how life is supposed to go. Some people do, right? And it has somehow gotten bound up with this idea of the pursuit of happiness, that I should be feeling positive all the time. And in fact, there's a whole school of psychology called positive psychology, which was started about 1999 or so. And it often gets misrepresented as this very thing. But if you read Martin Seligman and people like that, that's not their view. But somehow in the culture, we have this notion that's in people's heads.
Yeah.
Things aren't going well for me if I'm not feeling super up, with a smiley face all the time.
Yeah. It's funny. A similar thing seems to have happened with the concept of self-esteem, which, one of my big influences, as you know, is Nathaniel Branden, is considered very significant when it comes to the concepts of self-esteem, he's kind of put it on the map for a lot of people in the late 60s. He was writing about it. He wrote a book called The Psychology of Self-Esteem, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
But he ended up being kind of embarrassed by the way that translated into the popular notion of self-esteem. Is you, you feel like you're awesome. This kind of very flattened um, notion of self-esteem, whereas he saw it in a much more abstract way. Um, uh, and it sounds like it's very similar phenomenon to what happened with maybe with the concept of happiness. It sounds like in the past that
Yeah.
concept hadn't gotten, wasn't like collapsed into just feeling good. It had a much broader connotation.
Well, I think this relates to something I think we talked about last time, Adrian, which was the sort of marketing of psychology and the marketing of philosophy, right? Because oftentimes, we're going to market a product, let's say, and if we
Yeah.
consider Stoicism a product, right, or something like that,
Yeah.
you got to kind of dumb it down for the consumer, quote unquote. I hate that word. Who's
Yeah.
going to, buy your books or buy into, like we say, a certain worldview, and it can't be too complicated. Right?
Uh,
So you gotta sort of, you gotta have something on the box that's gonna say this is gonna make you happy, or your success is yours if you just buy this product. And
uh,
that's kind of, the modern capitalistic system that we live in.
yeah.
It's not really given to much nuance because we're trying to get people sold on things. And there's some value in that, right? But you don't want to overpromise,
Yeah.
which is oftentimes what happens here. Now, if you were over promising when selling a car and saying this car will get you from New York to Los Angeles in 2 hours, people would laugh at you, right? Because they know that this
Yeah.
is not a realistic claim, right?
Yeah.
But if you're saying something like this, this school of psychology or this school of philosophy will bring you immediate happiness, then a lot of people will kind of nod their heads and say, yeah, I want to be happy.
Yeah.
So that's part of it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. We,
And we are lazy people in America. I think in large measure, we're kind of lazy and we want easy results. And if someone is going to tell us, oh, this is going to bring you happiness, some people will buy into it.
yeah. Yeah. We don't have as strong a sense of realism in the emotional or psychological domain as we do in the physical domain.
Right.
No one thinks, "Oh, I snap my fingers and it'll start raining outside if I want it to." But it's I think it's not that uncommon for people to think I can just will myself to be happy or to not be upset about this.
Hey, the power of positive thinking, right? That book
Yeah.
probably sold how many 20 million copies or something like that. Norm
Yeah.
Vincent. So I don't know. We seem to have a little bit of a lazy streak, and I think that came into play with the self-esteem movement too. I feel kind of bad for Nathaniel Brandon having been branded, as it were, as the self-esteem guy, right? And then
Yeah.
it got into everyone has a trophy, and we should all feel good about ourselves. It's interesting you mentioned self-esteem, Adrian, because I was just rereading last night the two different chapters of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics,
Mm-hmm.
where he talks about should you be friends with yourself, and should you experience self-love, and which is basically self-esteem, right? Going back to Aristotle. Um, should you feel good about yourself? Should you have a positive view of yourself? All this kind of thing. And he says, well, there's two senses of self-love. One is you love yourself because of you're you. And the other is you love yourself because you're a good person. You have developed your character. You're seeking wisdom. You try to do well by people. You try to do good works in your life,
Yeah.
and all of those parts of character, like we were just talking about. So he says, well, and this is a famous quote from Nietzsche, who says the noble soul has reverence for itself. Well, people sort of chop off the noble part and they say the soul should have reverence for itself, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I'm a great person, no matter if I am
Yeah.
a great person or not, right? And it's hard to know if you're a great person because there aren't really objective standards for this kind of thing. And to the extent that everyone agrees on, okay, well, that's a great person over there. Or, now we have these sort of exemplars about Abraham Lincoln or whoever, but we don't really have good ways to talk about and think about these things. And we don't really want to be judgmental, especially in the modern world. We don't want to say, well, Martin Luther King Jr. was great and this other person wasn't so great. That's not very nice, right? And so we sort of drop off the noble soul part and just say everyone should have self-regard.
Yeah. Well, I think it's yeah, we don't have good ways to think about it consciously, but I think the unconscious or subconscious soul, if you will, kind of knows in this way. Well, and okay, and let me say this because I didn't that's real interesting that Aristotle broke it down in that way. I think of it in a therapeutic context in terms of the basic sense of worth and self-esteem more broadly, which includes the basic sense of worth. But the basic sense of worth is something that any living organism has. Just it's because that's part of what it is to be a living organism. There's a basic sense of worth that motivates action. So all human beings have that and can get out of touch with it, or it can get suppressed, but it's in there. So anyone who's still
Mm-hmm.
kind of moving around, there's a basic sense of worth in there that does not need to be earned. And
Yeah.
that can be an important concept because sometimes people get out of touch with that basic sense of worth, and then they think they have to earn the whole thing. And there's no just basic acceptance of the self. So it becomes very important to recognize, no, there's a basic sense of worth in there. It's not about, you don't have to earn it. You don't have to do anything other than get back in contact with it, but it's already in there. But that is not the whole of self-esteem, because to whatever degree you're in the habit of treating yourself unkindly or irresponsibly is just totally natural. You're not going to like yourself to that degree, just like if someone, to whatever degree someone else treats you unkindly or irresponsibly, you're not going to like them.
Yeah.
And that's natural. So that applies with yourself too. There's plenty of self-esteem does need to be earned, but the basic sense of worth aspect of it doesn't. And I think that can be an important distinction. Okay, but now where was it? Why that was a diversion from what? What was the? Why did I
Well,
set off on?
I was talking about Aristotle's view of self-love, and but those two different aspects. But that's what you just talked about. So I'm not sure what was in your head.
Okay, well I'll leave it at that for now, and maybe
I'm
do
working on my
another.
mind reading skills. We'll have to. We can always talk about it next time.
Yeah.
So that's interesting though, because we were talking about maybe touching on myth, and so I have been doing this reading about Greek religion and things like this, and I was just yesterday also reading a book by a Czech philosopher named Jan Patočka. Sorry, I actually taught English in Czechoslovakia, long ago, and so I should know how to pronounce these things. But Jan Patočka is unknown, basically, right? You've never heard of him, but you've probably heard of one of his most famous students and young collaborators, a guy named Václav Havel, who was president of the Czech Republic and a famous dissident in Czech prisons and stuff like that before, communism collapsed. And so Havel was sort of a student of Patočka. And so Patočka is kind of like a modern day Socrates. They had a dissident movement there in Czechoslovakia, and he was the spokesperson for this movement. And you could hardly call it a movement because there were so few people who were going to stick their neck out and deal with the secret police. Okay. And he basically died under interrogation by the Czech secret police in Prague in 1977, which is interesting because he died when he was 69, which is the exact age that Socrates was when he was put to death by the Athenians. So he was a philosopher, but he also kind of put his life on the line and said, look, this is something that I have to stand up and contest, which was the communist regime in Czechoslovakia. But Patočka talks a lot about in this, I'm reading his last book. He wasn't allowed to publish and stuff like that. And he would give these illegal lectures in people's apartments and stuff like that. And that's where this book came from. It's called Plato in Europe. And he talks about myth. He talks about, for instance, the Oedipus myth. Okay. And he talks about something that is similar to something that I was writing about recently, which is sort of the wonder of the fact that we exist at all. And to have this, and I think this might be connected to your concept of this basic self-worth. Like, here I am, I'm a living being. There's something of value to the fact that I'm here and able to, see the sunlight and experience life that if you think about all the possibilities of the beings that could be here, you and I are very improbable. Because if some sperm had just, turned right instead of left, it wouldn't have been you, it would have been someone else. Right.
Yeah.
So he has this analysis of the Oedipus myth, which I thought was very interesting because Oedipus was not supposed to exist. The gods, there was a prophecy that the children of King Laertes and Queen Jocasta had to be killed because trouble was going to ensue. And of course, the gods know all, right? So the gods came down, and I don't know if they went to the oracle at Delphi or whatever it was. The gods said, you got to kill this kid because hell's going to break loose if Oedipus survives, right? So what they do is that they hand him off to a shepherd and they say, go off to the mountains and kill the kid. Well, of course, the shepherd's too nice to do this. So he goes over the mountainside and now he's in some other kingdom and he hands it off to the shepherd that he knows because they meet in the mountains and drink some ouzo or something like this. And that shepherd then gives it. And this is a standard myth, right? You have this in other, the Egyptians had myths like this and so on, right? Mm-hmm. So Oedipus, of course, is not supposed to exist. He's not supposed to be here. And what happens, of course, we all know from Sophocles, is that he finds his way back to Thebes. He kills his dad on the way, of course. So then he kills his father. And then he comes back to Thebes because I can't remember the whole story exactly about what the pretext was. And the Thebes is under siege by the Sphinx. And the Sphinx has these riddles that it tells. And Oedipus, who's a smart guy, is able to answer the riddle and kill the Sphinx and save the city. And everyone's like, oh, well, you're wonderful. You can marry the queen because the king has died. And of course, that's his mom. And things just continue to go downhill, right?
Yeah.
So his analysis of the Oedipus myth is that none of us is really supposed to be here. Because it's utterly improbable that you and I would have come into existence versus some other humans that could have been here, but they're not, right? Because they weren't born because of, probabilities. But we've got two things. We've got one thing going for us and we've got one thing not going for us. One is we're smart and we can figure things out and we can figure out the Sphinx's riddle and we can solve problems. The other is we have no control over our emotions. We kill our dad. Tiresias comes in Sophocles' Oedipus Rex and says, well, you are actually the guy who killed the dad, right? And Oedipus says, no way, you're a liar. We're going to banish you from the city and you're going to be exiled. And you're going to be wandering the earth your whole life because you're a darn liar. I'm not the guy who did it, right? And so, he has this kind of myth of we're not supposed to be here. But since we're here, how should we behave? well, we should moderate our emotions and not kill people on the road just because they're blocking our way, and work it out here, people, instead of killing your dad. And but we can use our intelligence to solve problems. So these myths are very interesting, but I think they're connected with, they have these symbolic import, right? No one is saying that this is actually exactly what happened. It's not history, but it has this symbolic importance and has lessons for life. And so, so I think this is a roundabout way of answering your question about religion earlier. These mythical stories, they have meaning that we kind of derive from them. And you can say, well, that's religion or that's myth or something like that. But if you start to think about them, you can derive these lessons from them, if you will, about how to live. So I think they're all sort of interconnected. And I know this is sort of getting into this whole topic we wanted to talk about with art and myth and religion and stuff like that. And I think they're all very closely connected.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know if anyone ever interprets the Oedipus myth, which I guess weirdly I haven't thought too much about, given which is strange given Freud's.
Even its role in Freud.
Yeah. But does anyone ever interpret it as do not attempt to manipulate fate?
Well, I am no expert on the Oedipus myth. I'm just telling you what Jan Patočka,
Okay, yeah.
in the book that I'm reading. There are, I think, lots of interpretations of the Oedipus myth, and that's one of the interesting things about myths, right? Is that they're open to numerous interpretations, and you have to think about them and reflect on them, and there's all those meanings are in there because they're such powerful stories.
Yeah, yeah.
But so so maybe you could expand on that a little bit, what you meant by that potential interpretation.
Well, yeah. Well, I imagine probably the reason that interpretation came into my mind is I did remember where I was trying to go earlier.
There we go.
Which was back to this idea that the soul, the kind of subconscious soul, sort of knows that maybe we have a hard time talking consciously about, am I good, am I not so good, but the soul knows, I would say, in the same way that when your body is out of alignment, the body knows, you feel it. It's simply a structural thing. And I think character, in a way, is a structural thing, that when you're operating out of integrity with, well, maybe it's out of integrity with your basic sense of worth. You not on its conscious level, but you feel it. You don't feel good. You feel out of alignment psychologically. You feel, and so psychological alignment requires operating in a way where there's integrity with that basic life principle, something like that. And I do think there's a bit of a connection with myth, insofar as there tends to be this sort of, well, I guess in certain myths, there's sort of these mysterious qualities, or there's this idea of something to operate in integrity with. Maybe not in all mythologies, and maybe you can speak to whether you feel like this shows up in Greek mythology, but I mean, well, at least in Christianity, there's this notion of acting in integrity and in effect with God, right? With living in a way that is congruent with the divine.
Yep. Well, so one of the interesting things that came up in this book that I just read about ancient Greek religion, it's called The Homeric Gods, this book by Walter Otto. And he talks about how, so the Greek gods were not, they favored certain people like Odysseus. Athena was always watching over Odysseus and Heracles and stuff like this, right?
Mhm, mhm,
But they didn't. Athena didn't care about your immortal soul, shall we put it, right?
mhm.
So there was this sense that there was an order to the universe,
Yeah.
and you had to be live in accordance with the order of the universe. So you had to treat people right. If strangers came to your door, you didn't kill them. You offered them hospitality because it could be a god, right? And this is a
Mm,
standard trope in mythical stories and epic poems and stuff like that. That someone shows up and you mistreat them, and it turns out that was Athena in disguise, and now you're in big
right,
trouble, right?
right.
Um, so there was this idea that there was kind of an objective order to how people were supposed to behave, and if you acted consistent with that, that life would go well for you. It's really the same thing as having good character, right?
Mhm, mhm,
Um, but it wasn't this sense that I need to be saved, or woe is me. God's got to watch over me. How can I have this personal connection? There wasn't this sense of personality to the deity that there was. And now there was a sort of a sense of, Athena was this and Hera was that, and Zeus behaved this way and Apollo focused on that, and so on.
mhm,
And amongst all the gods in the Greek pantheon, they kind of had it all covered.
mhm.
But they weren't really these kind of personalities that you had a relationship with necessarily. Now, maybe the great heroes did, Odysseus and Heracles and people like that. But so there was this sense, I think, of, which gets back to Heraclitus and saying your daimon, your guiding spirit, is your character. What have you developed? And it's not like Athena is going to come along and pick you out of a crowd randomly because you believe in Athena. No, Athena or Zeus or Apollo or whoever, favors those who've already done the work.
Mhm,
Right?
mhm.
They're high achievers, they have ability, they're wise, they're brave, all of those things. And those people are the ones whom the gods will interact with, or seem to favor, but they're actually the heroes already. They didn't need the gods in the first place.
Mm, yeah. Uh, well, so okay, so what I'm thinking is um, maybe this is a little askew or loose, but the need to learn how to use intuition.
Hmm.
Um, um, to me, um, I feel like mythology somehow assists with that.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, what's the place of intuition in in living effectively?
Well,
Because that's how
intuition
I
to
sort of
me is
see.
a vague word, but yes.
Well,
I like the word I like the word
there's
insight.
conscious. Let's just is it, there's conscious thinking and there's intuition
Hmm.
and it, um, for me personally, it's been very important to learn how to appreciate intuition. Um, uh, it seems like there's a lot of choices that I can't that I on a pure conscious intellectual level I don't it's not clear enough
Yeah, yeah.
which path to go, but
Yeah.
the intuition seems often to be the right way to go, and it's often it's going with intuition in also leads to a sense of integrity, whereas going contrary to it can lead to this sense of feeling kind of at odds with yourself. But I mean, I'm spitballing here a little bit. It's not something I've thought out, but
Well, I think there's truth to what you say.
mm,
Um, I don't typically like the word intuition. When I worked in technology, I used to talk about people who had informed intuitions. So they had a
Okay.
lot of experience, right?
Yeah.
So they were software engineers who had a lot of experience, and they would look at the architecture of a product that we were building, right, in a system that we were building, and they would say, no, something's not right here. Let me poke around a little bit. And a famous example of this, of course, is Richard Feynman. They had him investigating something. This was, when he was just young, of course, but he was super brilliant. And they had him come into some factory or nuclear power plant or whatever it was. And he said, well, what about this thing over here? And it was some valve or something like, yeah, I can't even remember the story. And yes, in fact, there was a problem over there, right? There are people who have kind of insights into things, often based on experience. You're not always going to get those sorts of insights from someone who's green, who someone doesn't know the field, is new to the field, right? But you, for instance, in therapy, you've been doing this for years and years and years. So you have sort of trustable intuitions or trustable insights. Now you still have to follow them up, right? And see where they lead and do some investigation. But your insights are meaningful because you have experience in the field. Whereas if you asked me about, you know, civil engineering, let's say, and they're building a bridge, and you said, "Hey, Peter, you see any problems with this thing?" Well, I'm not going to necessarily have any insights into it because I don't know anything about civil engineering. So I
Yeah.
think there's some truth to what I prefer to call insight, or you want to call intuition, that where you can just see it, right? And
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking that the context of technology and engineering may be different than the context of art making.
every context is different, right? So,
Yeah.
um, I was at a public meeting on Monday because I'm involved in this whole thing because I'm president of my neighborhood association. And there was someone who came to the mic, and I was like, oh, I just don't have a good feeling about what this person is saying, right? And so there's all sorts of contexts, and different people have different insights into different domains of life, like we were just talking about. Like I have a friend who had never had good insights about economics and his personal finances, and ended up giving all his money to some cryptocurrency scam. He just didn't have those insights and
Mhm.
intuitions about, boy, this deal should be too good to be true. I shouldn't go down this path.
Yeah.
But there are people who are like that. But he used to be an airline pilot. So he probably had great intuitions about how to fly an airplane, right? And something's mechanically wrong with the plane, and we're going to whatever. But
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
people have different intuitions about different parts of life.
Yeah.
But this, getting back to your point about this sort of your soul, as it were, knows whether you're a good person or not.
Well,
Um,
if I may, I do I would not put it in that black or white way.
okay, has a
I
sense. You have a sense about whether you're going right in life.
yeah, or the degree to which
Yeah.
you are. I would prefer to,
Okay.
I'd prefer to
That's
that
fine.
because I do think people think in these black and white terms, and that's part of what gets them into trouble. I'm
Yeah.
either a perfect angel or I'm an evil, I'm evil serial killer.
No, that is a very good point, Adrian, because I do think that we have this kind of black and white view of the universe, and things aren't that way.
Yeah.
So,
But continue. I was.
um, well, so going back to my Aristotle, because I've been still working on my Aristotle book, he talks about how you were talking about integrity or integration. And
Mhm,
he
mhm,
talks about how a person who does not have well developed character traits, shall we put it. I'm not going to say
mhm.
they're evil, right? But they haven't really worked on the real estate part of the domain of life, right? That what Thoreau was talking about, where the character is this sort of thing that you can bank on. Um, and a person like that, he says, doesn't really have integration or unity, because in the morning they might be satisfied with X, and in the afternoon they're satisfied with Y, and they want this and they want that, and they don't really have an integrated sense of self.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And we usually like to end after about an hour, and this is a big topic, so we'll probably maybe have to put this one off till next time, because I'm curious to hear your insights from a psychological perspective about kind of inner unity or inner harmony. But he would say, well, those you don't really, until you've kind of, the self is an achievement. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to whatever bundle of desires and emotions, raw emotions that I feel that's good no matter what it is. I can't question all of those things. And then right now I feel like getting drunk. Later on, I'm going to feel like, doing this or doing that. And that's myself. And I've just got to honor myself. No, that according to Aristotle, you're not honoring anything that way, because you just have this uninformed bundle of emotions and desires, and you haven't educated them at all. You haven't pruned them at all. You haven't worked on your character, and you're not going to be a happy person.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's very interesting. I guess I'll just share one brief thought. And, since as you know, I've been interested in Freemasonry for the last few years. And one of the central kind of metaphors there is, stonemasons built cathedrals, temples,
Yeah.
or what have you. And the Freemasons, in other words, not the so-called operative masons who actually built buildings with stones, but it called them speculative mason. Well, they were building something too, which is basically their character, and that's a central metaphor, I think, in Freemasonry. That's maybe one of the reasons why I've been drawn to it and like it. This idea of building character, or cultivating or developing character.
Yeah. And I think this, it's totally connected, I think, with this idea of the noble soul and self-cultivation, as you put it. So I think we getting back to this self-esteem idea, I think we've dumbed it down to the extent that no matter who I am, no matter what I've done in life, no matter whether I've developed my character or I treat people well, I still have this, I've got self-esteem. I haven't done anything in my life, but I've got self-esteem. I'm great. Well, to me, that's a falsification, and it's a simplification, and it's dumbing things down for marketing purposes, essentially. For lazy people who don't want to do the work of becoming a good person. I know that sounds harsh. We're all supposed to be nicey these days, but you got to work at being a good person. You can't just expect it to happen.
Yeah. I agree. The therapist in me always wants to phrase things the most charitable possible way, and not be too harsh. But you have to work at it.
Well, this gets back to something that we haven't talked about yet. We were going to talk about in dialogue number 2, I think, or maybe even dialogue number 1, which is the differences between psychology and philosophy. Because traditionally philosophy has been kind of judgmental, right? You're just a bad person. You're not living up to your potential. And especially after World War II, we didn't want to talk about character so much anymore. We wanted to talk about personality and environment. You can't help who you are, and you grow up in poverty, and therefore it's okay that you're a thief and these kinds of things, right? We understand, we understand why you are the way you are. And traditionally philosophy has been kind of harsh on people and hasn't had that nice attitude of understanding. And I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, but anyway, that's a good topic for the future, perhaps.
Yeah, let's discuss that. I'm very interested in that topic.
Yeah.
Put that on the docket.
Put that on the docket. We'll do that one in dialogue number 5 or 6, or who knows. But anything else you want to talk about today? This has been fun as always.
Yes, indeed. I think this is a good place to wrap it up.
Okay.
Like a nice little arc that we did.
Well, see, that's the magic of conversation. And the reason why we like to do these things is that it's kind of spontaneously created. It's like jazz, right? Where you've got improvisation happens, and yeah, you might have some themes that you want to talk about, melodies, right, or chord progressions or something like that. But where the soloists take it and then bring it back, right, to the underlying theme is always the fun part of having these conversations.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The wisdom of spontaneity.
Right. All right. Well, I didn't touch my computer screen and now it's falling asleep and okay, here we are.
Yeah.
Now I can end our little conversation. Well, this has been great, Adrian, and maybe we'll do it again sometime in May.
In May, that sounds wonderful.
Once a month. This is like our monthly shot of sci-fi dialogue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Lots of fun as always. I really enjoyed
Yeah.
it.
All right. Well, be well. Bye for now. To be continued, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.